Good afternoon. I'm delighted today to welcome Dr. Gary Guthart as today's speaker from the View from the Top lecture series. This series gives the Berkeley engineering community a chance to hear from today's leading thinkers on technology innovation. And by the way, if you folks missed the Chronicle headline, it said, "Party like it's 2000, and thanks to technology." So, you know, they were saying about the NASDAQ being over 5,000 for the first time since 2000. Of course, the last time it happened, you know, but we're just in the middle of this recovery. How's that? I'm honored to welcome alumni and members of our Dean Society who are joining us today. The loyalty and support of these friends play a key role in advancing the college's mission, which is to educate leaders, create society, and serve society. Welcome to all of you, and welcome to the rest of the community as well. So let me introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Gary Guthart. As recently as the early 1980s, the idea of computer-assisted robotic surgery was the stuff of fantasy, still just a dream of forward-looking innovators. One of those innovators is our speaker today. After graduating from Berkeley, so he's a Cal Bear, in engineering physics in 1987 and getting his doctorate at Caltech, we like to make sure that there's a diversity of experiences, I guess. Gary joined a core team at SRI that developed the foundational technology for computer-enhanced robotic surgery. And we were just reminiscing about this great team. I got to see that they had DARPA sponsorship, DOD sponsorship, and they, you know, I mean, robotic surgery was stuff that, you know, you just said, if we sent people to Mars, that's how we'd operate on them. That was the party line. And then there was also battlefield trauma surgery. There was this Army doctor from Fort Ord called Rick Sutardja, who later, you know, he was a laparoscopic surgeon, and I know he was, came to, and so, you know, I think that team had already done a lot of the key work. And I remember seeing that robot and thinking this was just wonderful. And it was clear to these pioneers that this technology could accelerate the use of a minimally invasive surgery for a wide variety of procedures. Intuitive Surgical was founded in 1995 to test this theory. And we were reminiscing about how many people were naysayers at that point. And Gary joined the company, it said, as employee number 11. Is that right? Soon after. He was named head of engineering in his early 30s, and he rose through the ranks to become CEO in 2010. In 2000, the company's Da Vinci surgical system became the first robotic system cleared by the FDA for general laparoscopic surgery. Of course, it also made its name for, you know, for cardiothoracic procedures. And, of course, the general laparoscopic surgery also came along. It's now used really for a huge range of surgical procedures with the aim of reducing complications, reducing hospital stays, and improving patient outcomes really quite a bit over traditional open surgeries. Opportunities remain for this technology. A lot of our students try to seek employment at Intuitive, so I'm glad to see a steady flow of Cal Bears there. So this will be the focus of Gary's talk. Gary has said the first rule of being disruptive is having people who believe that they can change the world. And I'd like to say that, like all Berkeley engineers, he's doing just that. Please give a warm Berkeley welcome to Gary.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, and good afternoon. I'm going to take you through our view of the world here at a little bit high level at about 50,000 feet. I have about a half hour of prepared remarks, and then I'll try to provoke you a little bit at the end about where this could go, and I really look forward to the discussion and your questions. During the talk, I'd like to ask you some questions, if that's okay with our hosts, and perhaps you'll help me out and engage in conversation. Here's the problem at a high level. I just motivate, why are we doing all of this? There's a good thinker on technology and technology disruptive, a gentleman by the name of Clay Christensen. And he likes to say, never start talking about a product by talking about its specifications. That's inverted. Talk about human need, and a product is a solution to that need. So I want to talk about need. And he says something else which I think is absolutely true, and that is technology is perishable, but human need is durable. So don't fall in love with any particular technology. It's going to change. But the human needs that we have to bring our technology forward, the thing we're trying to solve will be durable, and that's true. So what's the problem? Around the world, there are millions of diagnoses every year for serious disease. Just to pick a couple, in the United States, prostate cancer is the second leading killer of men in the United States. 1 in 6 men over about the age of 75 will be diagnosed with prostate cancer. It's about 200,000 new diagnoses annually. There are 500,000 hysterectomies performed for various underlying disease conditions in the United States every year. And a very tough disease, colorectal disease, colorectal cancers and benign disease, about 200,000 a year. In the United States, there are about 7 million serious surgeries done every year. There are about 21 or 22 million surgeries of any type done a year. And in the United States, but a small fraction of the total world. So you look out here and you say, well, okay, that's a problem. These are people who have something that needs to be treated. So how can people treat things? And this is a simple model. It's vetted by nobody, just a mindset. So what are therapeutic ideals? If all of us want to create something that makes for better outcomes, we can come at it a lot of different ways. And so how many folks in here are thinking about pharmacology or bioengineers, but thinking on the pharma side or molecule design? How many folks are on the molecule side? None? Never mind, then I'm going to skip over that. How about radiology, interventional radiology imaging? And how about mechanical therapeutics, things you're going to implant in somebody? Mechanical design, okay. So what are the ideals, therapeutic ideals? I come from a big family in science. Mother was a science teacher. My father is a Stanford electrical engineer. Sorry. And we have a lot of our family members are in pharmacology. So it's a noble pursuit, right? And what's their worldview? What's the ideal? The ideal is to understand the molecular basis of disease and then design molecules that can disrupt that disease process. So it's a great mission, extremely hard mission. It's not Intuitive's mission. How about in radiation and therapy? This is kind of a combination of things where you want to image disease perfectly. If you were in the radiation, interventional radiology, you'd say, I got to find the disease from the outside. I want to take a good picture. Good pictures are really hard. Even today, they're very hard. And then I want to fire things at it. And they're particles. Sometimes those particles are electrons. Sometimes they're photons. Sometimes they're protons. People are firing all sorts of particles at it to try to disrupt disease process. We're not this either. So we're in surgery, the ideal is the following. You want to see disease perfectly. Now, typically you're seeing an image, an HD image, and I'll show you some images. And then you want to resect the diseased tissue and do some reconstruction. And you want to follow the camper's motto. Anybody know the camper's motto? Somebody in here's got to know the camper's motto. Well, leave the campsite as if you were never there. So, an ideal surgery is one in which you see disease perfectly, you reconstruct without error, and you never look like you've touched the body. That's the ideal. Of course, we're not there. But traditional surgery is far from that ideal. And that gap, that distance from that ideal is, in fact, the opportunity for all of us and the opportunity for our company. So the prior standard of care, what's out there, and this is as of about a decade ago. So as we entered the marketplace, what was the standard? So for prostatectomy, prostate is an organ about this big. It's in a man's pelvis, a male organ. It is underneath the pubic bone. In a healthy adult, it's about the size of a walnut. It grows as you age, and at some point it gets cancer. It can. To take it out is called a prostatectomy, which is removing it. Removing a prostatectomy, taking the prostate out by an open incision, which is an incision that goes from just under your belly button to just over your pubic bone, straight down. This is what the complication profile looked like in the peer-reviewed literature. If you looked out at the literature, somewhere between 1 in 10 and 3 and 1 in 3 men would have a complication from that surgery. So it would not go the way it was planned, and something else would have to be done. The death rate due to surgery was 1 in 170. And the number of men who would have to come back to the hospital after being discharged to get some sort of correction was 11%, about 1 in 10. That was the standard of care as of a decade ago. How about colon resection? So if somebody has a colon cancer, colorectal disease, a colon cancer is extremely aggressive, not something you want, and if you get it, you have to do something. Complication rate, and this is today's standard of care. Complication rate is 30 to 35%, so 1 in 3 people who have that problem are going to have to go get an additional intervention to fix something. Death rate from surgery is 1 in 50, so not something that you want to be involved with. How about hysterectomy? It's an extremely common procedure. Hysterectomies are done for 5 or 6 different underlying disease states. They can be cancer, uterine cancer, cervical cancer, ovarian cancer. It can be endometriosis, and it can be benign fibroids. There's a bunch of things. Complications, any complication, about 1 in 3. It's a safer procedure than the other ones. Death rate's about 1 in 1,000, and readmission's about 3.5%. If this was any other product that you were buying, would you accept this? If your phone dropped a call 1 in 10 times, would you keep that phone? I had one. It was called an Apple IV, and I got rid of it immediately. Right? I mean, it's terrible. Right? It's a terrible state. So why do people accept this? There's just no good alternatives, right? That there wasn't much in the way of alternatives. So how are we doing? Well, okay, so this is what it actually looks like. This is my warm-up slide for you. We're a surgery company. There's going to be surgical images in this talk. So if you're uncomfortable on this slide, the door is there and there. I'll give you some warning ahead of time. But this is a typical, I was talking about this is in a woman, but in a man, a typical incision might go here to here. Why is the incision that size? So you can get your hands in. That's it. The disease state is typically pretty small. And in fact, as those of you who are working on imaging get better at imaging, we find the disease state sooner. The actual size of the disease at the time it's found is smaller. So just an anecdote, most of the time the disease process might be about the size of a golf ball, but to get your hand in, you have to make an incision. So they went from this to a minimally invasive version, which is this kind of fan and seal incision or bikini line incision. And there's something called minimally invasive surgery or laparoscopic surgery. I'll show you a picture in a minute. And it has a set of holes rather than a line. Some folks, particularly engineers, look at that. I'm an engineer too, and say, well, is there a conservation of incision size? So if I added all these up and they were the same length as an incision, what difference does it make? Does it matter? So can you just conserve the incisions? The answer to that is no. It actually does matter. When you make a linear incision, you're dividing the muscle boundary. You're severing muscle fibers, and it's actually much harder for somebody to recover from severed muscle fibers. They have to reknit. When you make a puncture wound, it actually separates these fibers, doesn't cut them, and you actually heal faster. So it is not true that you could add the surface area of this up and get the same kind of impact as that. It's not a true point. Okay. So just to give you a sense of how big is the need, here we are back in 2004, so 11 years ago now. Those large open incisions, that kind of, that either sideways or up and down, accounts for the blue. That's so-called open surgery. So for prostate cancer surgery or hysterectomy, most of it was open. By 2004, we were doing, Intuitive had a clearance for prostate cancer surgery in the United States, and I think 2003. We're doing a little bit here. Conventional MIS, conventional laparoscopy is doing a little bit, but there's a lot of open surgery. Fast forward to 2014, and this is now the amount that's robotic. It's about 85% of the surgeries being done. About 80%, a little bit less, about 76% of surgery being done in hysterectomy is now minimally invasive, either conventional manual techniques or robotics. Robotics represents about a third of that market. Well, how about the rest? If you look out in colorectal treatment, in hernia repair, which is just something that's opened up, that you've had a muscle layer herniation, or in lung cancer surgery, this is one my mother had, there's still a lot of open surgery. So a lot of the old approach is up here, and the old approach has a lot of complications with it, and a lot of the complications are associated with the method of access to the body. How'd you get in? So even today, where we sit, there's still there's some minimally invasive surgery, but there's a lot of open. The picture doesn't change very much if you look outside the United States. So if you look OUS, you can see that they're following the prostate adoption, which is happening. But there's some minimally invasive manual, but there's a lot of need. And so where you look at blue, there's an opportunity to do a lot better. Minimally invasive surgery of any sort, roughly speaking, cuts the complication rate down, usually by about a factor of 2. It cuts the death rate having to do with surgery, usually down by somewhere between a factor of 3 and 5. It cuts the length of stay in the hospital down, usually by 2 or 3 days. And it cuts the readmission rate in half, give or take. So you got to look at these one at a time. But the consequences, the healthcare consequences of doing something minimally invasive for the right patient are really strongly positive. So that's the need. That's why we're motivated. Does that make sense? So why wasn't it solved already? And why would you need a robot that costs somewhere between $1 million and $2 million to do it? And that's a huge debate. There's quite some controversy around Intuitive. And the controversy is almost always centered on the cost. Do we really need to use a robot that costs that much? That's the big question. And the answer is, well, could you do it without it? If you could do it otherwise, do it otherwise. Said another way, if it could be done, it would have been done. And so why can't it be done? Well, this is laparoscopy. Laparoscopy looks like this. You have a surgeon on the outside. They have an endoscope. An endoscope is just a camera system. The chip, the CCD, is right here. This is a long lens that goes into the body through a puncture wound. Puncture wound is made with a long nail. They call that nail a trocar. There's a tube that provides access to the body. That this is being insufflated. Insufflation is CO2 pumped to about 15 psi. 15 psi is almost exactly the feeling of a basketball. So they create space. They fill this with gas to create a working space. They look at what's happening inside the body with an endoscope. This person is looking at a video monitor standing about where I am. And then they use long instruments that look like a pair of scissors only stretched to work inside the body. So that's what laparoscopy is, and actually they've gone quite far. It was innovated in the 60s, it came to prominence in the 80s, and it sort of stalled out in terms of what new things it could do starting around 2000. So they started trying it and they struggled with it. Why? Why is it challenging? You can imagine a few things just looking at it. First of all, your hand-eye coordination is disrupted. You're actually looking at a screen at a distance to your task. You're not looking down at what you're working at, so you've got to get used to that projection. The next thing is that you have a pivot here, and as you work through the pivot, for the engineers in the audience, you have direction reversals. So you move your hand down, the tip moves up. You move your hand left, the tip moves right. 2 of your directions are reversed, but 2 of them are not reversed. Insertion is not reversed, and rotation is not reversed. So you have a set of reversals that you have to accommodate, and people learn how to do it, but it's not trivial. It's a little bit like juggling. Some people can do it well, but not everybody can do it well. You see now, and it turns out as our nation has become obese, making the surgeons who are working on obese patients have to move around a lot of body wall. And it turns out in an obese patient, the body wall thickness can be about this much, about that much fat layer. And so that force is going where? Into the surgeon's shoulders. And so what's happening is we're destroying our surgeons' necks and shoulders by moving around fat pads. And so you see a huge problem with ergonomics. And many of our customers, many of Intuitive customers, actually adopt our products because it allows them to work on large patients without destroying the surgeon themselves. There's a reduction in manipulability. There's a reduction in the degrees of freedom of the instrumentation. So if you look at this instrument, it's straight. It's like this. Well, in human beings, we have a wrist, so we can articulate in multiple degrees of freedom. But most of these instruments drop 2 degrees of freedom. They don't have wrists. Some people have tried to put them back manually, but then there's a really hard control problem. I have a wrist down here. I need to manipulate the wrist up here somehow, and it's hard. It's actually, the user interface of that is non-trivial. So these are reasons that conventional MIS have struggled. There's no mystery about these things. Intuitive didn't discover those reasons. They're well known. So just to get to our priorities then, and these priorities, I think, are Intuitive's, but they're actually pretty well adapted to just about anybody who's working on a medical device. So there's nothing fancy about the priorities. The first priority is to create a product in the hands of a surgeon or practitioner that's going to create a better outcome for patients. And there's 2 ways to measure that. There's outcome, which is did you cure them of their disease? And there's invasiveness, which, as my grandfather would say, is how bad was the medicine? So did you cure them, and were there a lot of side effects? If you can reduce the side effects and up the cure rate, you've got something. So that's step one. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. But it's not enough. In our case, we're not an automation company, and I know Ken and team are going to talk about automation, and we should, but we're not automation. We're a fly-by-wire. And so that means the surgeon plays a big role. And so what's the value to the surgeon? Well, they want patient value. They want to do this. But they have to use your products, so ease of use really matters. They need it to be ergonomic. That's made a big difference for us. And it has to be dependable. So one of our products has about 10,000 components in it, if you count down to the resistors and the screws and the computers. It's about 7 laptops worth of real-time processing and about 50 iPhones worth of embedded processing. It's a big networked device. One of our systems has 6 networked robots in a default configuration and 8 if you add a second surgeon to it. So it's got to be dependable. You have a big, complex product, it better work. So that's priority 2. Patients don't buy our equipment, and hospitals don't, and surgeons don't. Hospitals do. So the third priority is for hospitals. What do they want? Well, they want patient value. They have a mission to serve their communities. They want surgeon value because they need to attract and retain and recruit surgeons who want to work with them. And they need economic value. So if they buy this thing and it costs them money and they can't recoup their investments, then they can't keep working, right? You'll sell one, but you won't sell 2. You'll never sell a second one. And so return on investment is really important. There are payers. So who pays for your surgery? There's a little bit of a copay, but typically it's an insurer. And so what do insurers want? Well, they want patient value. Actually, if they recommend things that are not good for patients, then they lose their subscribers. But then they also want a return. They want a reduction in the total cost to treat that patient. And so there's a big debate about how payers behave. Sometimes people think that they put this over this. But the companies who do that, who put reduction in cost over patient value, pretty soon lose their subscribers. So payers want this. And then the last one is society. There's value to society. And you go, well, that's kind of esoteric. What does that mean? And it's not really that esoteric. Society are those people who support the person who's sick. And so if your father is sick, my father went through a major surgery at Thanksgiving, and he comes home, you take care of him. Somebody's taking care of that person. If that person is at work, when they're out of work, then the workplace is absorbing that cost. And so there's a societal perspective to this, too. So those of you who've chosen to go into the medical field, how many folks are hoping to go into the medical field? You got to raise them high. So your customer is a really complex set. And I guess the thing I'd say to you is that you got to keep all of these things in mind. It's not enough. You got to start with patients, but you actually have to create value all the way down the chain. And if you don't, if you stop, if you create value to here, but you forget this side, your innovation won't be financed. It'll stall. And if it goes to here but not here, then these folks won't pay for it. So it's a tricky thing, and you got to work all the way through it. So anyway, those are our priorities. Let me just take you through what our system is. I apologize. This is James Earl Jones voiceover, and it's not me, but anyway, we'll go through it.
Fingertip control of masters at the console translate the surgeon's hand movements to the robotic arms of the patient cart. Motions are scaled to micro movements, and hand tremor is filtered out.
So the
Da Vinci Vision system displays high-definition video in 2 separate optical channels for a true perception of depth during surgery.
That's a uterus and
The
ovaries.
immersive quality of the 3D visualization, combined with intuitive motion control, enables a virtual extension of the surgeon's hands and eyes
That's
into the
surface of
operating
a heart.
field. Digital zoom allows highly magnified viewing of tissue without crowding the endoscope into the operative
Tell that's a
space.
human because of the
Increased
Batman.
surgeon
See a lot of
confidence
yellow, that's a
results
human.
from this superior view of tissue planes and the critical anatomy. The Da Vinci Si introduces higher resolution
stomach.
video into the console viewer for a
You can see
new
those
level
wrists
of
are
visual
snakes,
acuity
robotic
greater
snakes.
than anything previously
And,
available.
5 millimeter diameter.
As the surgeon operates at the console, his controlling motions are translated by the system to the endowrist instruments. The Da Vinci system provides
Technical
motion
term for this
scaling
is
that enables the
bilateral
surgeon to
teleoperation.
tailor the ratio of his
That's what
hand
this is.
movements to a corresponding micro movement at the instrument tip. Da Vinci EndoWrist instruments are designed with a unique wristed architecture, providing 7 degrees of freedom, a range of motion greater than even the human wrist. The system enables the surgeon to perform dexterous and very deliberate motion control of the instrument.
Pardon me. So, and this was the next one. So you get the idea of what it's doing. Bilateral teleoperation used in a lot of different kind of procedures. Total to date, the number of patients treated with technology, our technology, is about 2.5 million. Last year was about 550,000 patients who underwent this kind of a surgery. I want to talk a little bit about clinical data. I know this is an engineering talk, and I'll get there in a minute, but if you go into a medical space, you're going to have to do this translation to clinical and economic data. So what does that look like? To date, there are about 8,500 peer-reviewed journal articles on Da Vinci or its cousins. About 1,400 are level 2 evidence or above, for those of you who know about levels of evidence. In 2014 alone, there were more than 100 a month. 1,600 articles came out. Governments have studied us 25 different times from 14 different countries to look at the technology. And it's we do support some study. It's about 1% of the total. So the amount of interest in this and the controversy surrounding it is quite strong. It's pretty interesting. Just to give you a single procedure, a sense of clinical data. And so I wound up being trained in engineering and mathematics, and I spent a fair amount of time thinking and looking at clinical studies. And they're interesting. They're challenging. So on a single procedure, robotic prostatectomy, there are 1,600 articles as of the first quarter of last year. If you look at the ones that are new, there are 90. If you look at ones that have more than 5,000 patients in the data set, there are 20. And if you look at English publications with more recent data sets, there are 14. Of those 14, it says that the Da Vinci approach dominates other approaches in 12 out of the 14. Dominates means that it wins in every category. In 2 out of the 14, it says that for older men who are 75 and older and who have other urinary problems, their prior conditions are more predictive of their outcomes than surgical approach, which is fair. It's true. So you get a sense of, okay, well, how deep is the data set? Clinical data is part of the process. A challenge to anybody who wants to work on devices again. So anybody thinking about devices, you're going to face this challenge. We're in an era, and understandably so, of something called value analysis. The way people say it is comparative effectiveness research. And what they want to look at is whatever innovation you bring out, how does it compare in terms of outcomes and costs? So benefit divided by cost. How's the value relative to any other approach? And so how do you do this well, and how do you do it well enough to inform policy? It turns out one of the major challenges of clinical science today, I know we're talking about engineering here, but there's a huge challenge on the other side of clinical science, which is the clinical science and the methodology adequate to inform policy? How many folks here think that the clinical science and the methodology they use is adequate to make a policy decision about what treatment somebody should take? Anybody feel like we're there? In evidence, we're not even close. And the evidence is that every other year we hear about how you should either stop drinking coffee or start drinking coffee. And that problem is rife in medical devices. That issue of is something better than something else is extremely hard to determine, and let me talk about why that's hard to determine. So here's where we were 10 years ago. Most of it was being done open. There was a little bit of manually minimally invasive surgery in these domains: prostatectomy, GYN oncology, colorectal surgery, and thoracic surgery. Today the picture looks like this. So we see a large segment using Da Vinci, a little bit of manual, and a little bit of open. And what happens is there are some patients for which open is better, and it tends to be people with advanced disease or other comorbidities. In other words, if you have metastasized cancer, a minimally invasive surgery isn't actually necessarily the first thing you need. There are some surgeons down here who are fantastic. Not every surgeon needs a robot. That's true. And there are some folks, anybody in here juggle? Anybody juggle more than 3 things? How about anybody juggle 5? And so that's the issue. Is there are some people who can juggle like 10 balls. They're really good, but it's not representative of the total population. So the challenge with a device, as distinct from a drug, is that there's user capability that has to be measured in addition to patient effect. So there's a patient population They have different disease states and comorbidities. Some are obese, some had surgery, some have diabetic, some had prior radiation. And there's a population of surgeons who have variants. In drugs, you have a single variance, the patient. But in surgeons, you have in surgery, you have double variants. Variants of the surgeons and variants of the patients. That's what makes these analyses so hard. They're very, very rarely done well. And so here's a different one, benign hysterectomy. Hysterectomy where it's not cancer. And this is what the split of different procedures are. You have some that's open. You have some that's using our product. You have some that's using manual, about equal strength. And you have some that are doing so-called vaginal access. And so there's the segmentation. There's no one preferred approach. Why is that? Because not all the patients are the same. Actually, the underlying disease state varies strongly. And not all surgeons are the same. So one surgeon is not equally skilled in all of these. And so it's a complicated problem. And if you think of it as a policymaker, if you're somebody running an insurance company and says, how should I fund hysterectomy? It's actually quite hard because the material costs are really different. The costs for the tools here are the cheapest by far. This is here and here are the cheapest tools. And then these two are more expensive. But not all patients can follow in this, and not all patients follow in this, and not all surgeons can do all of it. So it's a complicated picture, and that becomes one of the things that we got to work on. A different story here for rectal cancer. This is kind of what it looks like. A lot of open surgery, some manual laparoscopy, some Da Vinci. And so if you were a researcher, which comparison is the valid comparison? Which one do you think you ought to compare? So do you compare this with this, this with this, these together? What makes sense? And so here's what you see, and it's an incomplete picture. The patient's perspective is actually this. These two are not very different from the patient's perspective, but the difference between this and these two is very strong. So the patient's perspective is, what am I getting? A surgeon's perspective tends to look here. They tend to look at these two, especially the ones who are good at this, and say, do I need the robot? But it turns out both of those are incomplete. And the reason they're both incomplete is because not all these patients are candidates for this or this, and not all surgeons can do these. And so you wind up having to do every paired comparison. So any paired comparison you're going to have to do as a study to make sure that you understand what the endpoints are. OK, let me jump to technology. That was a little run through for the clinical side. What are we trying to do in improved surgery? Why are there still complications is one way to look at it. And so even with minimally invasive surgery, complication rates are high single-digit numbers, kind of 8-ish%. Readmission rates, 2 to 3%. Still plenty of opportunity. By the way, a readmission, if you want to look at costs, a readmission is one of the most expensive things. I sent somebody home, and it didn't work. And now I got to treat them again. They got to come back. So what causes that? One of the things is you can't see everything. And so true story, my wife went through breast cancer 2 years ago now. And it took 4 surgeries for her to finish the surgical operation. She's doing fine. However, 4 surgeries, good surgeon. How many folks think that breast cancer surgeons can see the cancer? Raise your hand. None. So a breast cancer surgeon can't see the breast cancer. They look at a preoperative image. By the way, the preoperative image doesn't show the cancer either. The preoperative image shows calcifications that were the history of where the cancer was. And so they go in blind. Based on some anatomical knowledge, they cut things. They take it out. They hand it to the pathologist who goes outside the room and looks at it, looks under a microscope, looks at the cut edge of the tissue surface, and looks for cancer at the edges. And if they find cancer at the edges, that's called a positive margin. It means that you've left cancer in, and you go back. And usually you don't do that at the same time. So you've been discharged, and you got to heal, then you got to go back. That's the state of the art today. It's crazy. For anybody who's a technologist, you'd say, that's our state of the art? Are you kidding? So we can do better. So one of the things is, why can't surgeons see cancer? Now, it's a hard problem. You want a big challenge or a grand challenge. Seeing cancer in real time for a surgeon is a grand challenge. It's a heterogeneous disease. It's actually quite, it's at the molecular level or at the cellular level. It's hard. But there are other things we can do, too, and I'll show you some pictures. So we want to show the surgeon more than they can see with their naked eye. That's our mission. And we're working on, I'll show you a couple of images about things that are coming. Precision at the tissue matters. You think about those laparoscopic instruments. They're pretty long. You're working on the backside of a fulcrum. It's hard to be precise. Once you put a computer in the loop, you can do what? measure things. So now you can put measurements into the tissue at the distal end of the instruments. So what kinds of things would you be interested in measuring? And I suspect most of the people in this room have thought about, wouldn't it be cool to measure the following? We can measure how much tissue is in a gap. We're working hard on being able to measure contact forces. People are putting imaging sensors in miniature packages down at the distal end of instruments to be able to do in situ pathology. So you don't have to send a tissue sample out of the room. The surgeon can just snap in something that has a fiber optic channel, flip up the screen, and look, and do cellular level analysis without ever getting up from the console. So those things matter. I think it's a big deal. Those 4 holes or 6 holes to get into the body, there's nothing magic about that. There's nothing that somehow says from first principles 5 holes is the right number. So can you get in and out of the body with fewer holes? Can you get there less invasively? Can we pursue the ideal? And the ideal is no healthy tissue damaged en route. That's the ideal, and so we're working on that. Anybody in here a user interface designer, UX? Anybody interested in UX? Awesome, really good for you. Awesome job, right? And in medical device, ever more important. So if your iPhone doesn't work, you get frustrated. If your surgical robot doesn't work, somebody can get injured. So thinking through how people use these products in real time and being really thoughtful about the science of human interaction is really important. We work hard on it. And that's becoming of increasing import for regulators around the world is have you designed your thing in a way that people can grasp intuitively what it does. So we work on that, and we work hard on training technologies. Something that people don't like to think about is that human operators of everything from a handheld scalpel to a laparoscope to a radiology piece of equipment make errors. And so how do you do human performance assessment and train them better, more effectively? How do you make sure that the first patient who's getting a procedure for a newly trained surgeon has as high quality result as possible before they get there? And so I'll show you some of that. So starting with training technologies, we have partnered, we kind of have an app store. We've partnered with different companies. This one is an Israeli company called Symbionix to develop surgical simulators and tissue simulators. And so this is a surgical suturing simulation. Anybody in here do simulation? Hard problem. The amazing thing here that this team did is to get that suture to behave right and tie knots and then cut is awesome. It was really powerful. So this is pretty cool, and there are now 35 or 40 different modules, and there are more coming that start to look in trained surgeons about how to do these things. And while they're visually compelling, and by the way, it's still early, they measure skill, not judgment. Flight simulation has gotten pretty advanced, and where flight simulation is these days is they can put the pilot under a lot of stress and actually see how they work under so-called hot state, a state where they're really upset. We haven't done that yet in surgery, but that's where you've got to go. You've got to get to the place where you've really put the surgeon under stress to really test their judgment. This isn't there yet. This is testing raw skill. But the power of these things is not so much that they look cool. It's helpful that they look cool, but it's that it's a walled garden, and you get a lot of informatics. And so a learning surgeon now comes into our system and gets an intake set of scores, and you don't have to read the scores carefully, but in a bunch of different ways in which they're going to use the product, they get scored. We de-identify surgeons, we take those scores, we load them into servers, and we create an international database, which now has thousands, almost tens of thousands of records in it, that have all sorts of different surgeons from all different countries with all different surgical backgrounds, and you start being able to do paired comparisons. So you can ask the question, okay, Dr. Guthart is a urologist in Sunnyvale, California. How does he score relative to all the urologists in the world? How does he score compared to the best urologists? And so you now have a report card, not a see one, do one, teach one, which is pretty powerful. And so you get an intake and you get an outtake test. And so you can start moving into quantitative human performance measurement, the beginnings of that, and start providing people at, for example, something called credentialing committees at hospital committees who make decisions, real data about how people are doing. The power of simulation is it's a walled garden. We can ask people to do a task and then measure them while they do it. In real systems, we can also do unstructured observation. We can put computational observers on our systems that sit behind the surgeon as they do work and start making performance assessments of their ability while they're free roaming, while they're actually doing the surgery. And that is a huge area of research, a huge area of open ground, which is, okay, I can ask somebody to do a task in a simulator, and it's a predefined task. When I observe somebody in the wild, what are they actually doing? How good are they? And did they make a mistake? For those of you who are data scientists, that's a really powerful and will be a very open field of research to start giving surgeons real-time feedback in the real environment about what they're really doing. And so we see some groups in the world doing that, and we actually collaborate with various folks to make that data available. Our latest product looks like this. I won't go through it really deeply. It's interesting because it's kind of a big thing, but it's actually a rolling ceiling mount. And it's pretty cool. It's high technology, as you'd expect. It can pivot around the patient completely. These have a very large range of motion. So a system that you're looking at here, one of these arms can operate in a working space about the size of a mid to large beach ball. And so that's actually one of the big challenges. If you ask, why is the robot as big as it is? Well, number one, it's small where it counts, which is right by the patient. But number two is you want to have a huge working space. And why do you want a working space that big? Well, you want to get into the abdomen of the 95th percentile patient in the United States, and that's a big abdomen. So you need a large working space. And so that's what drives the design. If you think, well, I've got to have an instrument that reaches a certain length, and I want the instrument to be straight with a wrist, that determines the working space, working envelope of the outside. Then you've got to handle that, manage that working envelope. And then you've got to deliver the robots to the space. And it turns out some of the hardest engineering is actually under these covers, which is you want this to be highly precise over a very long cantilevered span. And so some of the most sophisticated mechanical engineering in here, for the mechanical engineers in the room, is actually how this design works to make this whole thing hang out there without it vibrating. So it's actually some of the least sexy but hardest material science in the product itself. Pretty cool. Well, what about going into the body with less, a smaller footprint? So this is something in development. It's not cleared. This prototype is 1 inch across, so this is blown up a little bit, but that's 1 inch. And so think about throat cancer, or think about rectal cancer, or think about uterine cancer, or think about going into the body through your belly button, your one natural scar. And so this is Da Vinci-like technology through a single access port. So a stereo imaging system here, those little binoculars. The ears are actually the light source, the illumination. And you have a left hand, a right hand, and a retracting arm. They're all, as you can see, kind of articulating snakes. These are 6 millimeter diameter in a package that's 12 millimeters. So, I'm sorry, 25 millimeters. So why do you care? Well, throat cancer is around the base of the tongue. And so getting there line of sight is very tough. I'll show you another video. This is a surgical video. What does it look like in a system? This is what our traditional system looks like. Just so you know, surgeon sits here at the console. There's an imaging tower and computational core. The computers are mostly in here. And then there's a patient-side system. That one you just saw looks like this. That's a big bow that manages those tips that are the inside. Here's a surgical image. This is a so-called transrectal procedure. So somebody has, this is in a lab, a simulation of rectal cancer. And it's kind of interesting. To do rectal cancer, what they do today is they go through your abdomen to work down into the rectum. But there's actually no reason to disrupt the abdomen if you don't have to. So if you have the manipulability and the access to the body that you want, you can go transrectally. This is what transumbilically looks like. This is a woman who had a transumbilical hysterectomy, and so she has a 1 inch scar in the umbilicus. This is what this is about 2 weeks after surgery, what the scars look like in a traditional woman after a hysterectomy. You can see here, here, and here. So we've removed these two. This is actually not on that prior product. It's on a little bit different product. Here's a picture of manipulation transrectally. So this is in a lab. And if you can dim the lights a little, I apologize for the dimness of the video. So this is the prototype that you just saw coming out of the cannula. So this is the rectum, and you're moving into the body, and the simulation is rectal cancer here on the base of the wall. And these are the instruments that you saw being deployed, and you're seeing through the eyes of the endoscope, that flying endoscope. So you're going to see a mode here where the instrument flies in. That's the surgeon controlling the flight into the body. So you'll see a little icon pop up. And now he's moving the group, or she is moving the group all together into the rectum to position the system where they need it. And then they'll do manipulation here on the wall. And it's called a mucosal resection, so taking off the mucosa which contains the cancer. You see the little sparks in this little bar light up. They use something called electrocautery to cut and hemostatically cut without bleeding. So they'll do a resection, take a part of that mucosa off, and then suture it back together again. Doing this manually, either not possible or extremely difficult. So you see a little icon here. This is a little moving set of icons that gives the surgeon a sense of what the device is actually doing. So this is the God's eye view icon. So there's a lot here. There's the instrument design. There's the algorithmic development for the control system. There's human factors design. There's strength of materials and material science. There's manufacturing engineering. There's test engineering. Just about anything that anybody in here is studying winds up getting applied one way or another. So I think the challenge, I'll leave you with a couple of challenges and a couple of prompts. All of us, I think, how are we going to, the ability to improve treatment is enormous. Treatments are nowhere near at a place where we all feel that they're easy. I don't think anybody in here had a surgery, had their family members go through surgery. Every one of them is nerve-wracking. You know, there's never a time when you go, oh, okay, they're going to go into surgery and it's not nerve-wracking. We're not even close. So there's enormous opportunity, and that's true for radiation oncology also. There's enormous opportunity to better. How are we going to do better? Healthcare is dominated by very large organizations, be they companies or insurance companies or providers. And bureaucracies can slip pretty quickly into looking at things that are cheap more than they are effective. And so accounting before outcomes. So if you're going to innovate in this space, you've got to understand the economics. It's a requirement. Innovation is fundamentally iterative. And one of the things that I think folks in engineering understand pretty well, but folks sometimes outside of engineering understand less well, is that things don't start born in whole cloth. They take experimentation and iteration. And organizations need to create room to do that. Otherwise, you'll kill the good ideas before they ever make it to maturity. And lastly, I think academia plays a huge role in creating these innovation opportunities. That they've got to create some working space for it. And it's not just on the engineering side. It's got to be done on the clinical side, too. There has to be room in collaboration, for example, with UCSF to try these things in labs and in clinics, because you won't iterate fast enough to make them happen. And what happens is, as budgets gets constrained, is what's the first thing that gets cut? It's because it's easy to cut. Is funding for innovation, and that's a problem. So I think we have to defend those pathways, and we have to defend the funding for it. Topics for conversation, just to kick it off, and then we'll turn to Q&A. I said before, a surgeon is in the loop. It's a supervisory control. There's actually a whole lot of little computational aids that the surgeon uses, but we don't turn over control of the robot to itself. And so I think opportunities really do exist for automation of subtasks. But I think you ought to think about it the way people are thinking about car automation, that it's going to start in sequence. And the reason is that when the computer makes a decision in the case of a surgery, it better be right. Right? Now, a surgeon has to be right, too. But once you've turned over control to the computer, if it makes an error in judgment, there's a consequence. I think that some of you, sooner or later, are going to have to engage into regulatory conversations. What are the regulatory frameworks in which you can bring automation to the market? It matters. And so these are conversations we have with agencies around the world all the time. And there's another inherent question here, and that is we have a broad platform technology. And any given month, one of our systems is used in 100 different types of procedures. So if you look at the body and you say, where does it get used? It gets used all over the body. It's a general purpose machine that to do a general purpose thing, it actually has to cover a lot of design constraints. And when you do that, it gets big and it gets expensive. So a lot of people say, well, what about little widgets? Why aren't we doing personalized solutions? And you think about things like 3D printing, or you think about more specific kind of technologies, or swimming capsule robots. And it's very different. Actually, the business model is different. And I think there's interesting opportunities there, but it's not trivial. it creates a different set of problems. So there are a lot of places where we can push on this model to get to a different outcome, but I think you got to think through how you get there. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the conversation.
Great. I get out of the way. I'll leave you there. Gary will take questions. I think students get preference.
As it should be.
Please tell us your name, year, and major. And there's microphones, so please use the microphone.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the College of Engineering and the Biomedical Engineering Society.
Oh, you know, I was remiss in saying all these guys in the black shirt represent the Biomedical Engineering Society. They're co-sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question.
So, in terms of going forward, and there's a lot of ethical implications with the technology. And when the computers start making decisions, then if things go wrong, where or how do you kind of put the blame or make the regulatory decisions for that?
Yeah, so when you think about liability and lines of liability, in general, the manufacturer is responsible for the device working as designed and as advertised. That's where it goes. If it does that, then the application of a machine to its use, to how it's actually used. For example, Intuitive, we train surgeons who use our products on our technology. This is what it means. This is what a master is. This is what clutching is. This is what the button does. This is what you should do when this error message comes up. That's our responsibility. But we don't train surgeons to be surgeons. Medical schools do. So these kind of lines of responsibility and accountability. The interesting thing about automation, especially clinical judgment automation, is it crosses those lines. So for example, there are some folks who had done automated guidance in orthopedics. And that may be a place where automation comes in sooner rather than later, is because you have bony structures that are pretty well imaged in X-ray. You can do a fair amount of machine vision on the X-ray, and you can guide the robot to where you want to go. So now what's happened is the operator, the surgeon, has turned over control to the robot, to the machine, and said, go where you say you will go. Well, let's say that there's a bug in the programming, and it doesn't go where you said it would go. Where do you think the liability now traces? Company. So that's what happens, and we shouldn't say that because there are issues of liability that no progress should be made. That would be a mistake. It's just that you have to think through, well, what validation then? Once you move to automation, what's the validation that the company's got to do to assure success? And that validation thought process and the framework by which your reviewers, the people at FDA or in Europe or in Japan, will assess that. That's a conversation that gets started, and it's interesting and complex. But a worthy goal. What you got to look for is that automation has got to be worth it. It's got to be substantially better than the alternative to overcome the inertia of doing that validation.
Hi, my name is Madiha. I'm a senior electrical engineering and computer science major. So a lot of the things that you talked about, it's pretty clear that if something goes wrong with the robot while it's in, like if my phone, something goes wrong with my phone, worst case scenario, I throw it at the wall. Yeah. But if something goes wrong with this, there are like some serious issues that can happen.
It's heavy, yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of fail-safes do you have in place currently to make sure that if something goes wrong, it kind of mitigates?
Awesome question. Great. No, it's right. One of the very first things that we did in the design, as you would imagine, is you first sit down and you think about what's the basic design architecture. Well, it's going to be this bilateral teleoperator. And then the very second question is, what are the fail-safes before you build anything? And so the fail-safes here are a few things. One is, what's the philosophy? And our fail-safe philosophy here is detect fault and then park safely. So it's a car that basically looks around at itself for faults, and if it sees one, gets over to the side of the road, indicates to the user that it had a problem and parks. That's as distinct from an aircraft model, which is a failover model, which says if I have a failure, I'm going to jump to a backup system because I can't park. And the difference there between having a fail-safe with a car and an aircraft is that the aircraft costs many, many more millions of dollars than the car does, right? So the car model is pretty good for this setting. What that means is that we have redundant sensing on just about any controlled axis. We have redundant sensing on non-controlled axes. We have a health monitoring network that runs at, I think, a little more than a kilohertz. And it's running around looking not only at controlled arms, but also at computational integrity. And so, in essence, just about anything you can imagine doing and we can imagine doing to this device, it will detect and shut itself down. So it detects, it has brakes, it parks, it flashes a notice to the user saying, I've detected a problem, it's here. We're, as you might imagine, pretty conservative. We'll flash those errors if we see a problem. So if I went up to a system that was in operation and I banged it with my fist, like this, it'll stop. Because it'll say, I didn't command that motion, and I saw it. So it'll park, it'll say, is everything good? And you'll say yes. And now if it loses one of its sensors, the sensor goes out, it'll actually say, I've lost that sensor, you can't unpark. You've got to park. And it does some other cool things. If one arm has got a problem but the other three are working, it'll disable that one arm and let them finish the case with the other three. There's some, but a large, as you can see, there's a large part of the conversation is how do you deal with these kinds of things.
Hi, my name is Lulu. I'm a third-year bioengineering major. All of the examples that you listed above are, I guess, internal surgeries. So where does the road lead for external surgeries such as orthopedics or just anything that, besides like GI and urogenital and thoracic?
Great question. So we and others in the world look at any problem from the bottom of your feet to your top of your head and say, where are current manual outcomes not very good, and where can technology make a difference? Now, there's a hurdle with technology, and that is that you're bringing in something more complex than a handheld instrument, and it costs more. That's just a fact. And so you have to have enough benefit by doing it to overcome the hurdle. But there are some things that make a lot of sense. Anybody heard of macular degeneration? I'm not saying we're working on it, but right, there are structures, really delicate structures on the back of people's eyes that that surgeons can witness degrading, but don't have the manipulation capability to fix. And so I know researchers are out there at universities doing some really nice and sophisticated things, extremely hard, making tiny little tools that can go deal with the retina and handle retinal detachment or cannulate ophthalmic arteries that are just tiny, really cool. So people are working on those things. There's, of course, surgery in the ear. There are people looking at surgery in the joints. There are people who are looking at reattachment of limbs and digits and doing nerve suturing. And so you can imagine a lot of things. Some of them we're working on, I think, are pretty interesting, and some of them we're not. And just
Hi, Anita Flynn. Can you give us a little bit of history of your FDA interactions? You said the first clearance you got was prostate surgery?
No. Yeah, it's a long history.
But
so
I wondered if you needed
this is like a big family history.
Right. Did you need a new FDA approval for every surgery?
Okay, fair question. So the first FDA clearance was in the year 2000. It was for some procedures that are conventionally done laparoscopically in the gut. In general, FDA has asked for data and clearance in sets. So a certain number of procedures around a certain organ system that is representative of the types of surgery being done. And then they'll clear that general area. So you might think of in the thoracic cavity, there's a certain set of procedures. To work on the heart, there's a different set of procedures. So we've done that in multiple sequences. And the conversations have been long and the submissions have been intricate. But it goes like that over time.
One right here.
Kiana Aran, I'm a postdoc in bioengineering. So most of the successful medical devices that have been used in clinical practices, like cardiopulmonary bypass system, they have manual system that the surgeon can intervene if something goes wrong with the system. Do you have anything in mind that,
So there's a couple of things here. One of them is we have designed the system such that if there were an event with the patient, for example, if the patient had an event independent of the robot, that the robot can be cleared out extremely quickly. So I think the spec is under 60 seconds. It can go from being in full operating mode to out of the way. So that was one of the design requirements. Surgeons, in general, we call that a conversion, which is you start with an intent to treat a particular way, and so you get part way in. Typically, conversions are not driven by problems with the device. They tend to be patient condition. It's true of anything. So in laparoscopy, for example, in complex spaces like the procedures I showed you, the conversion rate is 7 to 8%. So somebody will go in, they think they're going to get a laparoscopic minimally invasive surgery, and 1 in 10 comes out with an open incision. Conversion rates for robotics are substantially lower, somewhere between a half and a third as high. So what happens? If they convert, they'll either convert to laparoscopy, that's rare, or they'll convert to open surgery. And it's typical that it's not so much that the machine fails to progress, it's that the patient has a condition that requires an open incision, and off they go.
Hi, I'm Rutvik. I'm a translational med student. I have two questions. One is a follow-up to the earlier question about FDA approvals. So how long did it take for you to file for something like this, because there is no predicate, and how long did it take the FDA to approve it? And second question is, how do you sterilize a system like this? Because I guess there's nothing disposable in this.
Okay. So first question on how long does it take? It depends a lot on which procedure you're doing and which branch of FDA you're talking to. Sometimes it's multiple years. It could be 3 or 4 years. Sometimes it can be a year or so, depending on the severity and the level of concern of the procedure that's being done, how much data you need to collect, what the conversation has been like between the company and the agency. It's never trivial, and it's sometimes a multi-year conversation. With regard to sterilization, I'll show you a picture. The answer is that there's a couple of different things going on. These arms have sterile bags, sterile sheaths. So it's a plastic bag. It's called a drape, sterile surgical drape. So the expensive parts of the equipment are draped. These instruments themselves are actually steam sterilized. So they go through a fancy washing machine called a washer disinfector that cleans them. And then they go into a sterilization device. You can also clean these manually with scrub brushes and syringes full of water. And then there are some things that are single use, used once and disposed of. There are the seals that go into, that contain the gas for the body and so on. But cleaning and sterilization of any medical product is a big deal. And if you look out and see what there are different methods, there are actually quite a few different methods. And we have a cleaning and sterilization group, and it sounds trivial, like, oh, okay, well, how exciting can that be? And it turns out that there are microbiologists who work in that. We have PhD microbiologists whose job it is to go look at deposited materials on any of these surfaces and measure them to exacting standards. Tiny little specks of proteins that they're trying to analyze. So it's actually a real science underneath it, as you well know. Please.
Fantastic. So, this has been a fantastic afternoon. Congratulations on what you've done at Intuitive. It's been a great afternoon. So this concludes our view from the top, but BMES is going to present you with a small token of our appreciation. A shirt.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Awesome.
I was told if we could offer you fancier swag, but I was told this
Fantastic.
is the most popular swag.
All good.
Thank you, and thank you again to BMES, the Biomedical Engineering Society, and to all of you. We hope to see you next month. These View from the Tops are not regularly scheduled, but April 30th, Ellen Williams, the director of ARPA-E, will talk to us. So thank you all, and go Bears. Thank you.
Thanks.
People are melting away inside.